In the grim early days of the Pacific War, the skies above New Guinea were not just dangerous, they were a graveyard. Bombers vanished into clouds of flak, shredded before they even saw their targets. The crews who climbed aboard them knew the odds. They weren't flying to fight, they were flying to survive. The North American B-25 Mitchell was supposed to be the workhorse of the U.S. Army Air Forces, a medium bomber capable of hitting targets deep behind enemy lines. But in 1942, it was becoming something else entirely, a flying coffin. Japanese Zero fighters tore through bomber formations like hawks, diving on pigeons, and the B-25 seconds, slow and exposed, were mauled again and again. Yet from that desperation, from those jungles of the Southwest Pacific, something extraordinary would be born. A transformation that would take the B-25 from a vulnerable target into one of the most terrifying predators of the air war. This is the story of how men, cornered by death, rewrote the rules of aerial combat and built a bomber that could hunt back. By early 1942, the B-25 Mitchell was being rushed into combat with minimal preparation. Many of its young crews had logged less than 10 hours in the aircraft before being sent into battle. Bases in Australia and New Guinea were barely more than muddy clearings carved from jungle. Spare parts were scarce, fuel was rationed, and the enemy was relentless. Flying at the prescribed medium altitudes of 10 to 12,000 feet, B-25 seconds became easy prey. Japanese gunners had perfected the art of laying flak at those altitudes, and Zero interceptors waited above the clouds. Once the escort fighters' short-legged P-40 seconds and P-39 seconds turned back, the bombers were alone. Dozens of missions ended with crippled B-25 seconds limping back on one engine or crashing into the jungle. Pilots began breaking the rules just to stay alive. Some dropped to a few hundred feet above the trees, hoping to evade radar and gunfire. It was madness. Official doctrine called it suicide, but it worked. Bombing accuracy improved. Survival rates crept upward. And in the process, a few daring airmen discovered that at low altitude, the B-25 wasn't just a target anymore. It could bite back. The change began with one man, Major Paul Pappy Gunn. He wasn't a typical officer. Gunn had been a civilian pilot and aircraft mechanic before the war, a man who could fix or fly anything with wings. When he saw his men dying for lack of firepower, he didn't wait for permission. He went to work. In the jungle workshops of New Guinea, Gunn and his crew stripped the glass noses from damaged B-25 seconds and replaced them with solid aluminum shells, hand-cut, hand-riveted, hammered into place on the ground under palm trees. Into these crude housings they bolted multiple 50-caliber Browning machine guns, 4, 6, sometimes 8, all firing straight ahead. It was revolutionary. Traditional doctrine said, bombers bombed and fighters strafed. Guns' hybrid aircraft did both a flying battering ram that could tear through ships, airfields, and convoys. The recoil from the guns rattled the airframes, rivets loosened, ammo belts jammed, but the concept worked. General George Kenney, the hard-charging commander of the 5th Air Force, took notice. He didn't ask for approval from Washington, he simply ordered more conversions. Kenney later wrote, "Pappy Gunn's boys could turn a Sunday school bus into a gunship if you gave them enough, 50 seconds. In the Pacific, necessity wasn't the mother of invention, desperation was." March 1943. The Japanese were moving a massive convoy, 8 transports and 4 destroyers, carrying nearly 7,000 troops to reinforce New Guinea. Allied reconnaissance spotted them. This was the chance to prove the new weapon. The modified B-25 Strafer units roared toward the sea at mast height just 200 feet above the waves. Their pilots could see their reflections in the ocean as they approached the convoy. Rain squalls, low clouds, and deadly flak made navigation a nightmare. But the plan was clear: suppress the ship's defenses with concentrated gunfire, then release skip bombs that would bounce across the water into the hulls. As the first B-25 seconds attacked, streams of .50 caliber fire lashed the decks of Japanese transports. Gunners were cut down before they could man their stations. The air smelled of burning cordite and salt spray. One pilot later said it was like flying through hell with the door open. Bombs skipped like stones into the ship's sides, detonating with catastrophic force. Within minutes, the sea was a cauldron of fire and oil. The Japanese formation was annihilated, 8 transports sunk, 4 destroyers crippled, over 3,000 troops perished. Allied losses, minimal. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea wasn't just a victory, it was proof. The B-25 Strafer worked. Washington, astonished by the reports, ordered immediate factory redesigns. The jungle-born experiment was about to become official doctrine. Back in the United States, North American aviation engineers studied Pappy Gunn's crude sketches and photographs. What they saw shocked them: field conversions that made the B-25 almost unrecognizable. But they also saw potential. The result was the B-25G, rolled out in late 1943. Its nose no longer housed a bombardier, but a 75mm M4 cannon, the same weapon used in Sherman tanks. Alongside it sat multiple .50 caliber machine guns. On paper, it was the most heavily armed bomber ever built. In practice, it was terrifying for both sides. The cannon's recoil shook the entire airframe. Each shot filled the cockpit with smoke, blinded the pilot, and sometimes loosened rivets in the fuselage. The navigator had to stand mid-flight, grab a 15-pound shell, and manually load it into the breech while under enemy fire. Crews joked that it wasn't a bomber, it was a flying earthquake. Yet when it hit, the results were devastating. One shell could tear through a ship's hull or blast open a fortified bunker. Soon came the B-25H, with a lighter T-13E1 cannon and an even more insane array of guns, 8 forward-firing, 50 seconds plus side mounts, top turrets, and tail defenses. In total, some aircraft carried 18 machine guns, firing a storm of lead that could melt a destroyer's deck. The B-25 had evolved from a medium bomber into an airborne destroyer. By early 1944, the skies over the Pacific thundered with the roar of these new gunships. B-25Hs and later B-25Js were the backbone of low-level attack missions across the Philippines, the Solomons, and the Bismarck archipelago. Flying mast-top height meant operating just 20 to 50 feet above the ocean. Pilots could feel spray hitting the windscreen. Any mistake, a wave crest, an engine hit, a single burst of flak meant instant death. But in exchange for that risk came dominance. Japanese ships and island garrisons were shredded before they could react. The wall of lead from a B-25's nose guns could see through anti-aircraft crews, bridges, and radio towers in seconds. Some crews even removed armor plating to reduce weight, pushing the aircraft faster and deadlier. The B-25 Strafer became known as the Flying Lead Storm. Its attacks were filmed and analyzed by both sides. Japanese soldiers wrote in diaries that the two-engine demons came in low, spewing flame and metal, impossible to stop. And yet, behind every mission lay immense peril. A single engine failure meant crashing into the jungle or sea. Gun vibration could jam turrets or rupture fuel lines. The recoil of the 75mm cannon still threatened to shake the plane apart. But the crews didn't care. They had seen the alternative dying helplessly at high altitude, and they preferred to fight with their teeth bared. By mid-1944, the B-25 wasn't a bomber anymore, it was a predator. The success of the B-25 forced the U.S. Army Air Forces to rethink what a bomber could be. The old separation between bombers and fighters had vanished. Mitchell was both. Its legacy rippled far beyond the Pacific. The concept of a flying gun platform would later resurface in Korea and Vietnam with the A-26 Invader, the AC-47 Spooky, and the AC-130 Spectre. Every modern gunship owes its lineage to those muddy, improvised workshops in New Guinea, but victory came with a cost. Casualties among B-25 units remained brutally high. Low-altitude missions offered no margin for error. Crews returned with planes full of bullet holes, hydraulic fluid leaking like blood. Many never returned at all, yet their defiance became legend. When other aircraft broke apart under stress, the B-25 endured. When tactics failed, men like Pappy Gunn invented new ones. It was a story not of engineering perfection, but of human resilience. By the war's end, the B-25 had evolved beyond recognition. What began as a vulnerable medium bomber ended as an apex predator, a machine born of chaos, refined by courage, and perfected through necessity. It symbolized a larger truth about the Pacific War, that victory didn't come from playing by the rules, but by breaking them. In the steaming jungles and endless skies, innovation wasn't optional. It was survival. When the final missions ended and the engines fell silent, rows of B-25 seconds sat under the fading sun, their noses bristling with gun barrels, their wings scarred from battle. They were relics of a brutal era, but also proof of what happens when men refuse to die quietly. The B-25 Mitchell, once prey, now predator. A bomber that rewrote the laws of air warfare and changed the skies forever.